Welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast, where every other week we explore the beauty and power of faith in Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Neal.
Well, hello, everybody. Dr. Tom Neal here with a special edition of Sharing the Faith, which is intended primarily for those who work in the world of Catechesis of the Good Shepherd in our diocese, but for anyone, of course, who'd be interested. And I'm blessed today to have back again a previous guest on our show, Mandie DeVries, who's coming to us from Washington, D.C., where she is outside with a nice brick wall behind her. And she's going to share with us her insights. Mandie, it's so wonderful to be with you.
Thanks for having me back, Tom.
Yes. So, Mandie, you and I have talked a good bit about Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and your own many, many years of experience in that great gift to the church. And today I'd like to talk about a topic that's uniquely kind of timely for you, which is something that probably very few people have ever even thought of, which is the connection between a theological idea called divinization and Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And so we're going to break that open today. So let's just jump right in. Divinization, and how does that relate particularly to children, but of course to any Christian? Maybe the first question to ask you about this is how do we as Catholics present the Christian message of salvation and what it means? And then what does that word divinization have to do with it?
Yeah, so divinization is not a word that I had heard prior to coming to Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And really it's not one that necessarily comes up in training even. It's just that when you start diving into the theology behind Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, that you find out, oh, this is what Sophia was talking about. Generally, when you hear about salvation, when you're growing up, you would hear that means that you're going to be saved from your sins, and you're going to go to heaven. But kind of what that meant was always we always have the pictures, right? Like something about clouds and harps. What exactly is this going to be like? Like in general, Sophia, sometimes she would say, like, well, at least in training, we would hear the difference between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven. When we choose which language we would use for the children, generally in Good Shepherd, we use the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of heaven. And one of the reasons is because in general, heaven for children ends up being kind of understood as the place where dead people go. Like it really isn't a living reality for them. It's almost a post-dead reality, if that makes sense. And so this whole understanding of what heaven is kind of obscured by the fact that we think we already know, if that makes sense. So the reason why I think divinization is such a big thing that we should pay attention to is because it has to do with what it means to live in God's life, to share his life with him. So we have different things that come up in scripture, like the idea of becoming partakers in the divine nature. And, St. Paul saying, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Okay. So kind of get this idea that our relationship with God isn't like heaven is the place where we go to be with God, but it's bigger than that. It's more comprehensive than that. Somehow this is not a place we go, but this is a way that we are going to exist, like a way that we live. And the reason why I think that this is so interesting that Catechesis of the Good Shepherd broaches this is because, again, like you said, we didn't kind of grow up hearing it. We didn't hear it explained this way. And so, when you think about how are you going to explain to children, I mean, it happens regularly, right? When someone dies and you explain to children what happened and they're going to heaven, and we say all sorts of things, nice things about heaven, true things about heaven. No one's sad there. Everyone is filled with joy. Everyone's completely happy. They're with God, usually is what we say. And the children generally will respond with something like, well, I want to go there, and sometimes the adults are like, okay, how do I get you to really like this idea, but not want to go there today? Right. Like, so there's this, it's kind of complicated. How are you going to go about doing it? But
it is. And even thinking about, like, as you're raising this question, it's really a question more than just destiny or where we go afterwards, but who we are, like who God made us to be in the plan of things. And divinization makes it less kind of alienated from us. Like, salvation isn't just what's going to happen one day, but who we are now and who we're called to be now. And I know you have a particular love, especially for that Romans chapter 8 image of the human being in relationship to creation as a whole. So maybe any thoughts on that?
So all creation groaning, awaiting. Yes. So, this is such a big topic. It's so hard.
It's so big.
I think that the way to just begin is how does Sophia begin to talk to children about it? And one of the ways that she does it is through a presentation called The Preparation of the Chalice. Have you ever seen that presentation in Catechesis? No. Well, you've seen the preparation of the chalice at Mass, right?
Yes.
I remember being shocked when I went to Good Shepherd training. I mean, shocked like in a not good way, because I was kind of taken aback by how intense this presentation was. The catechist had 2 cruets that were prepared. She showed us how to prepare them, showed the children how to prepare wine. You smell it. It's okay. The water, it's just regular water. Okay. And at a certain moment in the Mass, the priest makes a gesture with the water and the wine. And the child already knows, because Good Shepherd is so good about this, already knows that these gestures have a meaning behind them. Like any gesture that we make, right? Like, it's something that isn't just a thing we do with our hands, but it's a thing we do that bears meaning. That's something that is behind it that we can look for. So we're already training the child and ourselves to look beyond whatever it is we're seeing, right? So we're looking at water and wine, and the catechist says, I'm going to show you a gesture Father does at Mass, and we're going to figure out together we're going to ponder what's happening here. So the chalice is brought. So there's a table prepared with a white cloth and a little chalice, and the chalice is clear, which is interesting because usually the chalice is, made of precious metals. But in the atrium, no one's consecrating this wine. It's going to be just wine, but we want to see what's happening. So in a sense, Sophia says even the vessels being clear is a way that we can see through the thing that's happening to what's beyond. So the wine is poured in, right? Like, just, you see it at Mass. The wine is poured in, and and in the atrium we generally pour in all of it. So there's a good amount of wine, and then we take that cruet of water, and I mean it's. I realize that I could lower myself here so you can see my hands. You got to see my gestures, right? This is one of the
appreciate what's happening.
Little drop of water, and just really intentionally, just a tiny drop of water. And usually when you give this presentation to children, they're kind of on the edge of their seat, just kind of watching for that drop of water to come down. And the catechist and that's it. That's the whole presentation. There's no words with the presentation, even though there is a prayer at Mass. But you don't really need the words of the presentation. You just can ask the question to the child, what has happened here? What happened to the water? Like it went into the wine. Well, first we might meditate on how much wine. There's so much wine. How much water? It's just a tiny little bit of water. And we say, okay, but what has happened to the water? Well, it's mixed in. It's in there. Can we ever get it out? And the child immediately would say, no, we can't get it out. Why not? Well, because it's all in there now. It's like it's wine now. It's mixed. And we say, well, we ponder. We know that this is something that happens at Mass, that there's a meaning to it. What could this great amount, this much wine, what could this mean? And you can help the child get there. Like in Joyful Journey, one of the books for CGS, she'll go ahead and give the catechist will go ahead and give the clue. I'll let you know. This wine represents Jesus. Represents Jesus. And what does this water represent? This little tiny bit compared to something so great. What could be so small? Who could be so small? And the answer is us. That we're so tiny. So Jesus is the wine and we're the water. What does this say about us with Jesus? And the child will say, we're together with him. And we say, well, how closely? And they can never be taken away from him. Like all of it. And then just the pondering. And I've had children. I had one child in particular where I presented this presentation to him. And he was a tough nut. I mean, like, he didn't like sitting for presentations, period. And he didn't have all of the pouring skills. And so, but he needed, like in the atrium, your goal is to get them just absorbed by something. So it was just like, I found something that I knew he was going to love. He asked for it multiple times. And so I just I put just the right amount of wine in the carafe so that it would be easier for him. He wouldn't spill. He didn't have to pick. Anyway, I made it simple so that he could do it. And we finished. He looked at it and he said, can I do it? And I said, oh, absolutely. So I help him do it. And he finishes. He pours out the wine again into the spent wine carafes. And then he's like, can I do it again? And I said, well, you're going to need to wash the chalice. So he goes across the room, carefully walking, goes across the room to wash the chalice. And then I'm frantically refilling the cruet so that he can refill the cruets. I'm like getting the right amount from the container for spent wine, and he comes back and does it again. And then he says, can I do it again? And then he says, can I do it again? And then he says, can I do it again? It was 8 times that this child repeated this gesture over and over and over and over again. And I'm thinking, what? Like, you could put 1 drop of water in anything. You know, what was it that was so attractive to this child in this moment? Well, I will just back 20 some years when I went through formation course and they said that Jesus is the wine and we're the water. And I knew one thing about the preparation of the chalice. And that was that in the Mediterranean, it was a thing. They put wine and water together. They mixed water and wine. And I was just like, I knew a little bit. I knew just enough to be dangerous. And so I said, with my arms crossed, to my formation leader, where do you guys get off saying that this is Jesus and us when they're just watering it down? That's just something that they did. Why are you putting a meaning behind it? I mean, like, that seems a little, bold to do in the 20th century when the church has been around so long. That's just my ignorance. And she said, I think that there's our journal article about this. And a little while later, God bless her, she had it with her because that's a lot to carry around, all of those things. And she comes and she sets it down in front of me. And she dropped it like she could have dropped a mic, here's this. And it was an article from 1989 in one of the journals of the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, where Sophia is explaining how the meaning of this gesture has kind of been lost. People don't really understand what it is, but she said it's actually rooted in second century and third century writings from Cyprian of Carthage, Ignatius of Antioch, I think, or Irenaeus of Lyon. I can't remember. So many church doctors. Anyway, they were church doctors, right, from the earliest centuries of the church. And the first one said that the water, exactly what the presentation is presenting. The water represents humanity and the wine represents Jesus. And if you bring just the wine and not the water, it's as though Jesus is present without us. And if you bring just the water without the wine, it's as though we are present without Jesus, because that was an issue. Sometimes people were doing this. And so they were erecting this as an action. So that's when I realized, okay, Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is not based on somebody's whim of the moment. This is rooted deeply in hundreds, thousands of years of tradition. But anyway, going back to the meaning of this gesture then, because I'm sitting here with one of the reasons why I thought this when I saw the presentation was I thought, well, if this is true, I should obviously have learned of this before now. I was a whole 25 years old at this point, and I thought, surely I would have heard this. That's how close. That's how close we're supposed to be. That's how close we are. When we get into level 2, we introduce the prayer. By the mystery of this water and wine, may we come to share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity. This is a meditation on the incarnation. The incarnation itself is a meditation on our connection to Christ. He became human. And of course, the God became man so that man might become God. This was my introduction to it. It was through my arms being crossed and thinking this is crazy and how have I never learned this before? God became man. Why did he become human? So that we might become God. And so throughout the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, this is like a beginning moment that we do, with 3-year-olds, right? Where they begin to understand without they don't know what divinization is. They don't know what transubstantiation is. They just know that they're so close. They just know that they are so close to Jesus. They just know that they're surrounded, protected, safe, loved. So what is divinization? We could start there. There's a sense of almost an identity. I mean, you retain your own identity. And that's what's been so exciting for me as I dive into the doctors of the church is that it's all of what I've run into in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is there. It's just in ABC format, right? Like very simple, very essential.
And thinking, so the profundity of what you're saying there, understanding salvation as a participation in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity, and why that sense of salvation is so rarely spoken of in preaching, teaching, catechesis in terms of practice outside of, obviously, Catechesis of the Good Shepherd enshrines this idea. So it's such an immense loss, in other words. But thinking about one of the essential components of divinization in the tradition is that human beings are made capable of this. We're created in God's image and capable of participating in the divine life of this intimate union. But that we have to grow in that capacity, that we have to be capacitated. I don't know how you say that. And there's something deep about CGS that reverences the child's, kind of almost religious potential built into who they are, and that baptism has then elevated and put into a new kind of place, and then plays on all the natural dispositions of children to receive that gift. So maybe talking a little bit about how CGS, does that well.
I mean, when you get to the time that they're in the second plane of development, you would say the 6 to 12-year-olds. So Catechesis of the Good Shepherd has level 1, that's 3 to 6-year-olds. Level 2 is 6 to 9, and level 3 is 9 to 12. So the second plane of development that Montessori talks about is that level 2 and level 3 child. And this is when they start to be more like adults. Like the child that's 6 and under is a different creature. And then you have what the rational mind comes into play, and they start having the capacity for things like time, that concept. And so when time comes into the picture, Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, Sophia basically wants to help the child find their place in the story. So the way that history is presented, there's a saying that she says all the time. It was misquoted for a while, and I think we have it now. It used to say since the beginning of time, but that is not what she said. She said, there has always been present in the mind of God, a plan to bring all of creation, all humanity, all of creation into fullness. Okay, so this is the plan to bring all of creation, all of humanity into fullness. And to understand, like, how does that's a big statement. She says it like, she actually leads off the History of the Kingdom of God, part 1 or 2. I can't remember which one, but might be the one on liturgy, actually, where she leads off that way. So part 2. But she, you kind of get this understanding. If you understand that this is a plan and it begins with creation, moving through redemption when Christ comes, like in the incarnation, it was always part of the plan of God that creation and humanity would be brought into fullness with God. And when she says fullness, she means the fullness of his life. So that idea, like we hear in 1 Corinthians, that God will be all in all. And so when she's talking about this, she's talking about it's a plan God has in his mind from the moment, from forever. I mean, it's always his plan that he is going to bring us. We get to be together with him. That's the plan. And so when we lay this out for children and we lay out this beautiful timeline of creation through redemption, it's huge. It's a huge time frame. I mean, considering like from let there be light until human beings come on the scene, like the scripture talks about it in several different ways, in the 6 days of creation or 7 days of creation, or the way that is spoken of the second chapter of Genesis, and just what we've discovered through our scientific knowledge is that this seems like a really big project, like a long lasting big project, God preparing for human beings to come on the scene, right? And so when the children kind of see this picture, we get to the end, like we get to creation or redemption where Christ is here, the timeline changes color, now everything is yellow. It's redemption. This God becoming man. And we say in a couple different ways, like it was not enough for God to give all of creation to human beings. He even wanted to give himself to human beings, right? And so this moment happens, and then the timeline changes color. It changes to white. And this is the time between now and that third moment of the history, which is called the parousia. That's how we generally pronounce it in Good Shepherd, but I've heard people say parousia. How do you say?
Parousia. I say the same as you.
Parousia. All right. Well, it works better singing wise. The children make up songs about the parousia.
I can't see Perugia being sung.
Perugia. Yeah. So anyway, maybe that's why it should say parousia. Anyway, but parousia is the time when God will be all in all. Kind of those things we were talking about earlier about heaven and when there's no more death and there's no more tears and there's no more mourning and no more hunger and nobody's lame and nobody's dumb and nobody's deaf and nobody's blind. And it's just like this amazing time. But we were like, okay, we're here. Parousia is here. What is this time? And it's called, we from the time the child's 6, we introduce this time. We say this is the blank page. This is the time that we write together with God. And so it's a collaboration. God is always looking. This is another thing we say all the time in CGS. God is always looking for collaborators in his plan. That's someone who would listen and allow themselves to be remade and respond and live according to this plan. So, I mean, from level 2, they kind of get that idea that, okay, I have a role, I have a part in this. And then in level 3, we kind of see, yeah, people don't always respond. in the plan of God, it's this giant timeline, like, whoa, how big this thing is. Like people complain, like, okay, if you were going to do Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and like build a room for it, you would have to have this wall that's 30 feet long and not have any windows on it. Like just can any level 3 atrium just not have any windows for 30 feet? Because we need to display the plan of God because it's huge. But when the people start to rise up, there's these little like red marks on this timeline. And the red marks are these squiggles, this breaks in the plan of God, wars. And the children cannot fail to notice the 20th century as the most squiggly red marks. There's something that's really kind of devastating about seeing the light of God filling, like visually looking at this representation, seeing the light of God filling the world, spreading throughout the world at the same time that there's so many breaks. Because if you look at what the plan of God is not just to divinize like me and you, but all of creation is meant to be brought together with him, right? And so there's a sense in which the plan of God is to bring us together, but the more we're brought together, the more we fight, right? So, I mean, if you look at all of the amazing things that have brought us together, we are more connected with our neighbors. Well, we're more connected with others than at any other point in history, right? Like you're in Florida, I'm in DC, right? We're right now able to connect with each other. This is amazing. But that ability to connect, that ability to learn how to, control the forces of nature has negative sides too. And so there's a sense of this like a weightiness of this is the plan, right? But how are human beings going to respond to the plan? And I mean, central to the plan of God and the level 3 is the gift of the sacraments as a way to be able to live into this. I don't know if that answered that part of your question.
It does. No, it very much does.
Yeah.
And it opens out maybe into, again, the idea that this catechetical methodology and the theology that stands behind it, which is deeply imbued with this idea that God wishes to have this deep, profound union with us that we call divinization, where he shares his life with us, that we are cooperators with him. As you said, he wants people to collaborate with him, to work with him in the unfolding of his plan. And so divinization is really the process of entering into that intimate collaboration with him, where we're aligned with him, with the grain of his will and his, the work of his grace, and that the contemplative posture that Catechesis of the Good Shepherd cultivates, not only in children but in the adults who work with the children, the openness to the inner teacher that speaks within and that tutors you from within. So maybe some playing with that is this idea of divinization as cooperation that requires that kind of receptivity and attentiveness.
Yeah, definitely a receptivity. But I mean, a lot of times we get this idea of like going out and doing. Like I have, I don't know. My husband and I have been watching this show lately. It's called The Good Place. I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but the kind of the thought, I mean, even from the first episode of the show, which has just been so weird and interesting, is this the way that it's determined where you're going to end up in your life is this point system. You do these good things, and then and you don't do bad things, and then like you get pluses and minuses, and it all works out, and then at the end you get judged, and then you get decided which way you're going to go. And I think that for the child, I mean, there can be a danger that we think that it's our actions, if it's this objectively good action, that's going to be the thing that gets me into heaven. Where you start to realize that it's not my brokenness isn't going to keep me from heaven. It's my do it myselfness that's going to be the block, like the Lord. I mean, I don't know how, Good Shepherd does a good job, but I don't know how you explain it in a podcast, how the receptivity of the child is formed such that, I guess what I'm really thinking, what's coming to mind is the prodigal son story. In Good Shepherd, we call it the forgiving father. And we use this as a meditation on, for preparing for First Communion, but also especially for reconciliation. And so the child sees how, and I love this one because, it kind of gets to the root of what our problem is as human beings. We want, phenomenal cosmic powers. We want to be able to know what's right and wrong, do what's right and wrong, but we don't necessarily want him to. And in the story, of course, we know the son wants his father's inheritance. And the word in Greek, actually, I found this really fascinating, is ousia. Isn't that fascinating? He wants his father's substance.
Look at that, ousia.
But he doesn't want his father's presence. And the word presence can also be translated ousia.
That's awesome.
Okay, right? So he wants the ousia, but he doesn't want parousia, right? And so what happens is he runs away, and the father gives it to him, which he does. He gives us our life. It's not like we have our own. He gives us our life, and he even says, good luck. I will give it to you. And then the son, it's just such a fascinating story when he runs off and he's doing this all on his own, and he's in poverty and just with the pigs, in a bad situation. And it's such an interesting moment when it says coming to himself, sometimes coming to himself, coming to his senses. He thought, my father. He thought again of his father and the way that his father even treated his servants. And the son makes the decision that he's going to go back, and he's rehearsing. I'm going to tell him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired servants. Okay, so that this is this whole thing he's going over. And when the father sees him, it's so interesting because while he was still a long ways off, his father caught sight of him. Right? He was waiting. He was watching for his son. And he goes and he embraces the son. For what? For bringing back some of the inheritance? No. It has nothing to do with what you've brought with you. It has to do with the way that you approach the father. Like the recognition of who the father is, the recognition of who you are in relation. He didn't have an expectation that the father was going to give him back his sonship. He just knew he wanted to be with the father, whatever it took, right? So he comes, and his father, interestingly, like mostly naked, it sounds like, because his father has to give him a cloak and he has to give him shoes. And if you're not wearing shoes, it's a sign of slavery, right? So he's in a bad position. And his father embraces him and he doesn't even get it out, right? I've sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. And he doesn't get that next part out, at least in the scriptures that we transcribe, or the manuscripts that we have, right? So the father interrupts him, kisses him, and says, "Rejoice with me. The son has come back to life," right? Like, so we get this understanding of what it means to come and share the life of the father, right? It's not something that we've earned, but it did take that son a long journey in his life to figure out what it is that he wanted. And when we meditate in level 3 with the children on the other son, right? What is his situation? Because he's kind of doing the stuff his father's saying. And he's even with his father, but he still wants to go and be with his friends. Like there still is kind of this sense of like not really understanding. Like the father's like, "Don't you get it? Everything I have is yours. Everything I have is yours." I mean, so you listen to these kind of things, and I said to the children one time, I've probably told you the story, but I said to the children one time, praying for First Communion, and we were just all sitting around a dining table talking about this. And I said, I wonder when the first son was coming back to the Father, what was he feeling? What was he thinking? And they said that they decided that he must have been filled with fear and joy, fear and sadness and joy all at the same time. Because he was so sad about what he'd done, but so joyful for what his Father had done to him. So the human, response to sin, sadness and joy. And I said, and what about the Father? And one of the little girls goes, only joy.
Wow.
I mean, if you want to talk about like preparing for receptivity isn't something that we can give ourselves, right? Like it's always going to be an initiative of God. So receptivity really is rooted in a confidence in the boundless love of the Father, the boundless love of God for us. And once you know that, once you recognize that he's not going to absorb you like into a blob and you stop being you, but by giving yourself to him, you become more fully you than you ever were. Like if you've ever seen somebody running away from their responsibilities or their family, it's not like, oh, well, now you're truly free now that you're an alcoholic or that you've given yourself over to this addiction, whatever. It's like, that's not when you're truly free. When you're truly free, when you've given yourself to him. But those are like little bit by bit, messages that come with this work.
Well, thinking about again the way that you just broke open that parable to kind of allow you gave me a different perspective, as a matter of fact, on that parable, which I've heard, I don't know, maybe hundreds of times. That phrase of the older brother, all the father says to the older brother, all that I have is yours. And then thinking of it in light of the older brother's inability to receive that, but rather to try to achieve that and gain it, he's closing himself off. And thinking about one of the things that, that CGS has taught me, especially through our conversations, is the renunciation of control over the work of grace, over God, over the child and what we want them to achieve and whatever we might in a particular session. And I think, again, in terms of helping cultivate receptivity to the divine life and divine offer of God's own self to us. I think of, as you're speaking about a music appreciation class I took in undergrad. When I grew up, I had no appreciation for classical music at all. It was what my parents listened to. It was boring. It was uninteresting. And then I took this music appreciation class I was like a semester after I'd gone through a life-changing conversion experience in college. So I suddenly developed this broader interest in things. And so I took it as an elective. Anyway, so the music appreciation class was that. It really was mostly focused on appreciating the classical music tradition from Bach, particularly on into the early 20th century. And after that class was over, like I fell in love with that music genre as a whole during that class because of the way the teacher taught it. But one of the things he really helped us to do is to be attentive to the subtleties and the meaning that underlies the music and the style and the rhythm and the way things are put together and or the text that the music is interpreting, like the Matthew's gospel, right? Interpreted, I think that's Bach, right? Bach's gospel, Passion of Matthew, or whatever that was, I listened to. And I remember afterwards, I could hear that music. I could receive the beauty of it. I could receive the depth of it, and it kind of got into me and it shaped my way of seeing the world and the way of seeing things and kind of got into me. And afterwards, thinking about that years later, I thought that's really what good catechesis does. Catechesis makes us appreciate the way the divine life enters this world. And Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, just for children, particularly does that in such an extraordinary way. And I guess that's what I've appreciated more than anything else, if that analogy makes sense. So maybe opening that out again to this idea of divinization and CGS as a theological methodology for cultivating that capacity.
Yeah. I remember I was in a training once with some School Sisters of Christ the King from Lincoln, Nebraska. And when we do our album pages in our courses, this is every presentation has an album page. And we always have the doctrinal content, which is like the meat, the good stuff, what's true about us and God and our relationship with Him. That's what's being conveyed in this in this presentation. And then we see the presentation, but then we kind of reverse engineer it to get the album page. So it's kind of like taking what's received and then going, okay, what was that? Like, let's think about this. What was that? Well, it was really saying all of this. And in the direct aim of the presentation is saying, how did this come about? Like, what was most essential? What was focused on? What was like, if all else fails, what's the thing that you're trying to get at? What specifically are you trying to do? Usually, what do you call it? A lesson plan, a lesson plan for school. Oh, sure. They would have objectives, and the objectives are usually not for the adult, but for the child. The child's going to learn this, they're going to learn that, they're going to learn this other thing, they're going to know how to do this, they're going to be able to repeat this when you ask them. And in Good Shepherd, that never happens on our pages. Our pages for the direct aim is something that the catechist is going to do. I'm going to lift up this, this, and this. I'm going to ponder this, this, this. I'm going to maybe kindle joyful anticipation for blah, blah, blah. But this is my work. This is the thing I have control over, because the words that are coming out of my mouth. But I don't have control over what the child's doing. But the indirect aim is the hope that of things like fruit that's going to grow. So if the direct aim is the seed, you put it in the ground and then you go, this is what's going to grow from it. So we give these presentations and we come up with some of the ones we have are education to wonder, or to nurture a virtue, or something like that. But one time I was in this course and we had done a prophecy, and it was prophecy of the names in Isaiah. So wonderful Counselor, God Hero, Father Forever, Prince of Peace, those. And we were meditating on this, and the sisters turned in an indirect aim I'd never seen before, which is pretty, after doing 20 trainings, and I've trained all the people, I'm kind of used to what people come up with. But they turned in one and they said, we think that this presentation, and really all of the Good Shepherd presentations, indirectly nurture receptivity in the child, to nurture receptivity. And I think part of the reason why the sisters were so keen to that, or aware of it, was because they've all had so much formation in the theology of the body, and really understanding what it means to be human is to be able to receive, to be able to be given. But it is not something that is natural to us. And maybe we shouldn't say it that way. It's not something that is common among human beings, that we would be able to receive a gift. But this presentation, I was like, that's interesting that you would take these names and you would say, this is nurturing receptivity. But the names themselves are gifts. And so when we ponder, what does this mean? Mighty God, Father Forever. We don't even go that deeply into what they mean. We're just enjoying the enjoyment of it. But you would say the age of 6 and under is a golden age for the enjoyment of God, without any other stuff attached, right? You don't have to be thinking about the 10 Commandments, or whatever. The things that you do when you're under 6, the church would say that you can't sin mortally under 6 years of age, because you don't have the capacity to be able to choose not God, right? Just full out choose that. So there's a way in which that 6 and under is this golden age of just being able to receive fully with nothing else. And if that happens, if that receptivity is nurtured, and they've received the gift of this wonder of relationship with God, and which they're born with. But I mean, if it grows and is nourished, right? They get to the time of moral development. We've talked about this before, Tom, but they get to the time of moral development, and the questions they have are so different. it's not like, what's right and wrong, what's this person supposed to be doing. It's how can I respond to you? So, we'll have to do a whole nother thing on moral formation, but one of Sophia's great minds that she followed was this priest, Dalmasio Mangilo. He was a moral theologian in Italy.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
And he talked about how, the idea of our lives is like being adorned with our works, like ornaments on a Christmas tree that are all sparkle and attractive and stuff, but they're not real. They're dead, or they're not living, versus a fruit like that comes from the relationship of the plant to the soil. So if you think about this process of, we could call it the process of divinization, but if you could think about just the understanding of that our life, like grace, we talk about grace all the time, but grace is God's life, right? So if God's life is in us and that it's the sap running through our veins, then there's a sense in which everything that happens, everything that develops and grows off of that is all just because we're in right relationship with him. And so the moral life is kind of the question of just, I want what you want, Lord. Let's do it together, right? And so there's, if we think about capacitating someone for that, it starts way before they're 7. It needs to start when they're very, very, very young. Balthasar would say, with the smile of the mother, right?
Yes.
Like that understanding of there's an otherness, but this otherness is for me, right? Like that. So there's a way that, like, when the child is first realizing that I'm a being that's separate from another being, but the way that we communicate with each other is through something as beautiful and simple as a smile. How much that smile needs to be part of this child's life, and continuing to bring in the safety and the love and the tenderness of God. It makes all of the rest of life that much. I'm not going to say it's just like easy peasy, but there's a sense in which there's, it's connatural to them. It's not as difficult of a shift. The conversion happened already.
And just maybe for this episode, and however you want to take this, just to play off of something you said short time ago, which many ways is, to me, as I've listened to you the whole time, is kind of the master theme of CGS as you speak about it, is the cultivation of the capacity for wonder, that openness to wonder, and then the renunciation of you might say a moralizing view of Christianity or of faith, which reduces it to to obedience to the commandments, kind of or a strong sense of guilt over what you've done that you bring to God, and kind of your relationship gets caught into this cycle of guilt and relief of guilt and guilt and relief of guilt, and not in the parable of the prodigal of the good son, as you mentioned. So anyway, back to that idea of wonder, which is necessary as a preliminary before we come to the moral life, and not reducing Christianity also to a kind of an idea of a meritocracy, right? Like that TV show you're talking about, where it's all about, racking up points so I can get what I need to get in the end. So how does wonder become the fundamental educational work that's done for a child? What does that look like, especially for the catechist that's trying to cultivate that, or the parent that's trying to cultivate that?
How does it become the foundation?
Yeah, right. In other words, how is the methodology and the theological whole approach of CGS really oriented towards this idea of the capacity to wonder, to open oneself to that, the greater, the larger, the bigger, the transcendent, but also that which is not under our control, that we learn to kind of receive and allow to shape us, and not us to shape everything around us through manipulation.
It's a dissertation. That's a big question. The reason why that's such a big question is because, like what you just said, is the tendency to control, the tendency to circumscribe everything around us. It feels safe, but it makes it so that there's nothing outside of me. Like I am the thing, right? What wonder does is wonder is a way of presenting reality. It's the actual way. It's actual reality, not like my own like closed version of it, but it's an actual way of recognizing that there is something else. So wonder isn't, I mean, it's so funny because it's not like I'm going to make wonder grow. The thing that happens with wonder would be an indirect aim only, right? That's something I have no control over, wonder. But I know that, like, if you want to look at my direct aim on my auto page, I know ways to grow wonder are attentiveness, careful attentiveness, being slow, being intentionally not over presenting, like, so that I'm not going to give so much content. I'm going to give small bits of content, because if I give, like Sophia would say, rich food and not too much of it. We want it. It's like limbus bread in The Lord of the Rings, right? Like one little bite should last you. And when we, in a time of our existence where I'm going to quote that Good Place show again. There's so many fun things that happen in that show. But one of the things that they've said is they're figuring out, like, why frozen yogurt? Frozen yogurt is just such a weird thing. You take ice cream, which is so great, and then you like make it into frozen yogurt. Why? And it's like, oh, it's just like just a little twist that. And she goes, oh, it's such a human thing to do, to take something that's so good and then make it a little bad so we can have more of it.
That's awesome.
Isn't that so interesting?
Awesome.
There's so many really fascinating things, but that was so interesting to me because that's been sticking in my brain ever since I heard it. But it's like, we do that with education too, because it's kind of like, well, we need to fill this whole day. And so instead of giving you like the one like bite that's going to have everything, we have to like dilute it down, and we have to like bring in extra stuff that doesn't matter. And so in a sense, we've dissipated your wonder rather than concentrating it, by giving you too much, this is a good one. I think I've told you this one too, that Sophia said that when we give too much, the child's attention is changed from thing to thing, and we give too much, the child will defend himself with indifference.
Wow.
Oh, there's Andrews Air Force Base is close by, so I don't know if you can hear the helicopters coming by. But last time I said it was Anderson. I had just moved here, Andrews. Anyway, so so this idea of being of allowing the little bits, like something so tiny as a little host, right, a little pearl, to be enough, but we train children from a very young age of whether or not the answer lies in getting more, or getting less. There's another quote. Maybe you're familiar with where it comes from. I might vouch it, but it's something like this: not to be. The word is not circumscribed, but something like that. Not able to be encompassed by the greatest, but allowing himself to be fully in the smallest. That is the divine. Have you heard that quote? I'm gonna have to look for it. But there's something about divinity that you could have everything in the whole world and not have it, but yet you could have something so tiny and have all of it, right? Like there's something about the smallness. And for children, they're small. And so when we pay attention to small things, they're like, hey, I understand that. I understand that being small. And we pay attention. We don't let those things just go by. They know it. They recognize it. And they,
wow.
That's the beginning of wonder. But I think too often adults had wonder, bored out of them, and have a difficulty in being slow. There's a almost a painfulness about the things that would bring about wonder. But it generally is spending a long time looking at one thing, pondering one thing. Not necessarily for a long time. Maria Montessori noted that for children, when they do their work and then they restore it and then they go do something else, like get a drink of water or something like that, if the work was rich enough, they need a breath. They need water. They need to sharpen a pencil. They need to do something else. But it isn't because that wasn't enough for them. They didn't spend 5 hours on it, so it wasn't rich enough. It was because it was so rich that now they're taking it into their, these other activities of their life. So kind of recognizing that wonder isn't like just, staring at one thing for an extended period of time. But it is allowing yourself to be captivated and then carrying that.
Wow.
Carrying it with you.
Well, that's a perfect way to conclude this conversation. And I would love in the next conversation to talk about another word. Divinization was this word. Next one would be mystagogy. How mystagogy really is that work of doing precisely what you just said, which I think is so rich, which CGS is masterful at. So I'm super grateful. Thank you so much for this really fascinating conversation that took me places that, in terms of divinization, which I've wrote my master's thesis on a particular author in the Eastern Church that, developed a theology of divinization. But this took it a whole direction I've never considered before. So I find it really rich. So thank you so much for this. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another edition of Sharing the Faith, a special edition for Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. Joining us today with Mandie DeVries, who is a soon-to-be doctoral candidate over in D.C. We're thankful for her time here, and until next time, God bless you.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Sharing the Faith podcast. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit ptdiocese.org/sharingthefaith. If you listen to the audio version through an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe or leave a comment on the episode. Thank you for listening.